Hello, my name is Peter Parf. Welcome to the new Brit workshop. How many times have you tried to do some trenching cuts on your miter saw and found that it actually doesn't allow you to cut something fairly shallow in a fairly chunky piece of wood like this? That is as high as I can set my trenching. It's about 41 millimeters from the surface of the saw there. So there's no way I can take out a 20 millimeter chunk from a wide piece like this. Well, there is a way, and I'm going to show you. Well, I'm sure you're all familiar with the UJK Parf Superdog, and this, when inserted into your MFT3 or custom track saw cutting station, will stick up 60 millimeters above the surface. But now it's got a big brother. And this is the tall version of the Parf Superdog, and this sticks up above your bench top by 120 millimeters. And that means you can use this for trenching with your track saw, even with quite chunky bits of wood. Let me give you a demo. Now, just like the normal UJK Parf Superdog, the tall version comes with the same extras. So you can put the 25 millimeter shoulder on there, or you can have it just as a plain dog on its own. I've got fitted the little chamfered shoulder, and that fits into a hole on your bench top or the MFT3, which you've cut a small chamfer in. And so that means now this dog, when you push it down, is going to find itself in a perpendicular position on your bench top, and you just turn the knob at the top just gently to hold it firmly in place. And you would have the one at the top end of your cutting station or MFT3 and one at the bottom. And that's the two of them fitted. So now I've got two long Parf Superdogs on my bench. It's against these two tall Parf Superdogs that the guide rail will be pushed, in fact attached using these UJK clips here. Now, we do need to be able to push our stock, which in my case is this piece of wood here, against something so that it's then going to be held at right angles to the guide rail. Now, we could use a couple of the ordinary Veritas Parf dogs and use those to push the wood against. But there's a slight risk there, because this is a tall piece of wood, that we could end up with the wood being pushed at an angle or something silly. So this is an ideal time to use a pair of the normal Parf Superdogs. One in there, and for sake of argument, one just there. So those are now in place. They're upright. It means I can now place my wood against them, and my guide rail will go against the long Parf Superdogs. Now, in order to support that end of the guide rail, I've got an offcut of this wood here. So you can now see what the setup is starting to look like. I'm going to attach my rail clips, one there and one there. My rail is supported at this end. It's going to be up against those normal Parf Superdogs there. Now, if I want to cut a rebate at the end, as I do here, you actually don't need to mark, as I have done, this out at all. All you need to do is get the piece of wood which is going to fit down into that rebate, push it against the guide rail, and then make sure that the piece of wood, it's flush here, and then then you can then do your cut, and that will be perfect. All we have to do now is to set the saw to the correct depth. And one way of getting the depth right is to get your piece of stock, which is going to go down into the main piece, and hold it underneath the guide rail, and then adjust the depth of cut accordingly. And I'm happy that's as close as I need to get for this particular task. Push that down. Our stock now is pushed against those Parf dogs. The guide rail is pushed against these tall Parf dogs. Now at this stage we've done that initial cut and we know that that defines how deep into the stock we want to go. We could just do one more cut roughly in the middle and then chisel out the rebate. Or you could move this piece along just one little bit at a time and do all of the cutting using the saw. Now I have learned that once one's done that initial cut that defines that edge there, it's best then to go back to the beginning and do a cut there and move slowly forward this way. And I'll bring this round to the front here, and perhaps you can now see that I've got a pretty good rebate. Right, in this next example I want to put a rebate in the middle of the field of the piece of wood, say about there. And let's, for sake of argument, say that we want to have our rebate at 120 millimeters from this edge. Now if I were to put that line at 120 up against my guide rail and make a saw cut, the saw would actually cut here. And so therefore we'd end up with the cut being about 2 millimeters too far this way. So rather than having a pencil line at 120, I'm going to put my pencil line at 122. And I'm now going to position this so that that is on that pencil line. So there's my first cut, and I'm going to now just use the same depth setting that I had before and make my cut. I'm making sure my piece of stock is pushed well against the normal Parf Super Dogs, which are here and just under there. My guide rail, as before, is attached with the rail clips to the long Parf Super Dogs. So now that is my first cut. Now before I do all the intermediate cuts, I'm going to do the cut at the other end. And in order to do this, I'm going to place my piece of stock so it's level with that edge of that cut which is nearest to me. So my piece of stock is pushed against the guide rail. My edge of my stock here is level with the edge of that hole. So I'm now going to do my cut just as before. So I've now created the two cuts which define the limit of exploitation. And I could now just move incrementally this way, so moving a little bit at a time, or I could do it the other way and move a little bit at a time that way. I'm actually going to do it starting from this outer edge and working backwards. The reason is that I've discovered that it's possible that when one has, as I had in this case here, the guide rail over a gap, it's possible by putting too much pressure on the saw to make the guide rail dip a little bit, and that can alter the height. If you start the cut from the right hand end and work to the left, the problem does not exist at all. Now I just slip that in, and you can now see that's a pretty good rebate. And because it's Parf guide system, perfect right angles. Now these long Parf Super Dogs are 120 millimeters above your bench height. Now you've got to allow really at least 5, maybe as much as 8 millimeters of this for your guide rail to push against. So that means your stock can be 112 millimeters in height. So that's easily a 4x2 and maybe a little bit more that you can start doing rebates with these Parf Super Dogs. Word of caution, because they're much taller, there is more scope for you to push and with the leverage, push these in out of line. Just let them go in under their own steam. Don't push them one way or the other, whatever. And if you're worried, check it with a square. I've just pushed that one down ordinarily, and I can assure you that is absolutely square because it's getting its registration from the chamfer that's at the bottom. So just push it straight down, don't graunch it left or right, and then tighten it up, and away you go. Now with my Capex saw, the shallowest that I could do was a cut which ended up only 41 millimeters from the bottom edge here. But with this system, you can have a rebate which is 1 millimeter from the surface, because that's where it's all being measured from the surface here. So you've now got the flexibility to do rebates of any depth, up to the capability of your particular track saw. With the TS55, when it's on a rail, we're talking about 50 millimeters. With a TS75, we're talking about 70 millimeters. So that's your range from 0 to 70 with a TS75 track saw, 0 to 50 with a TS55. So your rebates with the long Parf Superdog are now pretty easy. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.